What's up everyone, and welcome to another Rust electrical tutorial. I'm Austin, and today I'm going to be covering how to wire like a pro, 5 core concepts in 2024. Now, these come from recent to semi-recent updates to Rust, and are by no means the only concepts you should know, but they are certainly some of the most important concepts you should know. So if you're new to the game or to Rust Electrical, this is a great place to start. For you veterans out there, feel free to check out the chapters and jump around to see if there's something that's more appropriate to your needs. Now we're going to get started with wiring and placement. The first thing you're going to need obviously is a wire tool. These are simple to craft. It's 2 high qual, a level 1 workbench with no BPs required. You need this to both view the stats of an item, say this charge left, active usage on this large rechargeable battery. I can't see that information unless I have a wire tool equipped. You will also need it to physically wire switches together as is its primary purpose. Some controls to note: if you hold R on the keyboard, that brings up the wire color wheel. Simply select a color by highlighting it and left clicking on your mouse. You can also change the color of an existing wire that you've already run. So let's say you don't like that these are green, you can pick a color, say orange, highlight it by looking at it and just press R on the keyboard to change it to whatever color it is you currently have active. So that's a very useful thing for organization. You can also highlight a wire itself, isolate it by left clicking when it's highlighted like so. As you toggle it on and off, you toggle between all the wires and just that one. So you can left click until it's isolated. And this is useful if you want to, say, follow a wire to figure out where you ran it through walls or whatever. This can make diagnosing your circuits or changing things very useful. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put together a knee core, not to teach you how to do it, but just to use that as a canvas to show you some of these techniques in action. I do have a very detailed video on the knee core if you want to check that out, and I cover it briefly at the end of here. So when you go to place switches, if it's on a wall, it's going to remain vertical now, which is really, really useful. You can place them on the ground, upside down, whatever. For most of them, you just have to experiment to see where you can place them, where you can't. Some are a little different, but it's pretty intuitive. So once I have one on the wall, one new feature is that you can hold shift on the keyboard, left shift, to snap it in line. So I can snap it vertically in line with that switch or horizontally in line with that switch. And so once I have one, I can then start building up a switches by just holding shift to make them nice and straight. So once I have, say, 2 here like this and 1 below, if I shift click down here, it's going to place it in, aligned with both of these corners. Same thing on the top with this gap here. Once you have 2 or more, the next time you go to shift click, it's going to reproduce that gap for you automatically. Same thing down here, which is super useful. So what this really means is that if you're looking to build really nice organized circuits, this is a great way to do it. So if I go to start wiring this up, let's say I start with this memory cell here. Let's say I go down and I accidentally connect it there and I didn't mean to, or whatever. You can place it by left clicking like I'm doing here. If you left or right click, you can disconnect the wire in the reverse order all the way to the beginning, and the last time it'll physically just remove it from the switch altogether. So you place with left click and you can remove with right click, which is very, very useful. So if I want to run this switch all the way over to here, I can do so. If that was a mistake, say, you can highlight it, left click, and actually remove it. And you can see I actually jumped away and it's still there, which we will cover here in a minute, and then reconnect it. So very, very good. They improve the amount of control we have over this. So as you start getting better at this and faster at this, you'll start to see that you can choose the ones you want, or you could just do everything in gray and then change the color like I showed you earlier. I'm not gonna worry too much about making this super nice, but see how that's wanting to snap. If you get closer to it, you can have a little bit better control. You can kind of pick up those tricks as you go. I'm gonna go orange up to here, I guess. And so sometimes I'll come out like this and find out where it's gonna go so I can try and get it right. But again, you can always unconnect it, so it's not critical that you get it right the first time anymore, which is pretty useful, at least for me. And so let's see, last couple of ones here. I want this up here. Again, this is sort of this is the new version of the knee core. For those of you who've seen my video, this is going to look very, very familiar. And so once you have it here, this one stays in 2. This one sets to 1. This is all based on PC. You know, sorry for you console players. We're all rooting for you. We can't wait till you can be where we're at here. And then I'm going to set these to 100 as sort of easy mode. I talked about that in my other video. 100, and because I'm matching my battery. And that's that. And then to connect the battery, I'm going to, and this is actually going to be another great example. This one's already available to me, so I'm just going to run this over from the battery and just kind of pop it up on the wall here to there. And then this one here is supposed to run to the input on the battery. So I'm going to just jumper it down, and we'll just kind of follow it along here. Now, here's a cool thing to note is that let's say I want to connect this to here, but there's already a wire attached there. So what I can do is, while keeping the wire, just having it in my active currently, if I hold right click on that connection point, it will release that wire, and I still have control of my original wire that I can now connect it. So you can be holding a wire and disconnecting a wire at the same time, which is also very convenient. So now the final thing I would do is I would attach my root power down here. That would go into here. And there we go. Now we have a functioning knee core, 100 to 100, because it's a 100 watt battery, 100 rest watt battery, and we're good. And so that's wiring. I mean, you can see it can be as complicated or not complicated as you want. One last little tip is that, let's say you're extending a wire, because wires have a limit. So let's say I have, say, this root combiner, and I have a wire coming out of it here. You'll notice that I've got this wire, that number there. That's the distance you can run a wire before you've run out of room. So wires have a limit, but you can extend them. So let's say I get out here and I already have it building. It's already in my hand, and my connection's, say, over here, and I can't quite make it. I can actually switch away from the wire tool. So the wire tool's in my hotbar space number 1. If I roll away from it, say, to these other switches, when I get back to it, I'm still holding the wire. That is a super great update we got. So if you need to, say, add a switch here, I can do that and then roll back to my wire tool, and it's still connected. And then here we go. Now I have it. I could unconnect it, and I'm holding it with right click here. Left click, connect it, right click, unconnect it. I could delete this or whatever, set up a new one, roll back, still have it, reconnect it. It will stay, it has its memory with you unless you were to move the wire tool away from the hotbar slot 1. If you move it, you lose that memory of you holding the wire. But if you don't, you can disconnect and roll away and come back and still have it and connect it again. So that is a particularly useful update that we received fairly recently that has made things considerably easier. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is root power, and it's called root power because Rust uses a tree, plant, whatever you want to call it, nomenclature, in that the first things, if you think of a tree, it starts with its roots and it goes into its trunk and it goes into its leaves. The root power is the your ability to start a circuit, and it's the root of that circuit. It's your ability to generate a power to charge your batteries or to power something, whatever. And so the most commonly used in the game are the solar panels here and the wind turbines. There's also a generator, but for most players, it's going to be either solar or wind. And what you need to know is that root power is affected by placement. So if you just slap solar panels down in some direction, their output is going to vary. And so I did a very, very detailed video on this where, if you look at placement north versus south, because it depends on what month you're in. So if I were to, say, go into my server and say ENV month, I should say, I'm in November right now, which means in November, I get more solar if I face them south. But you'll notice that if you just face them north, overall, you generate more power north than you do south. And for most servers that are, days or at most a week before wipe, facing your solar panels north is gonna provide you with the most power. And so you'll notice that, like, right now, that one has 8, that one has 18, which is facing north. This south facing one has got 20 because in November I get a little bit more than I do in say other months. And so this was just this test I just did, solar panel output by month, taking it high noon on the middle of the month. And so it does matter. If you don't want to care about it, just face them north, and then you'll never have to worry about it. If you face them east and west, you'll notice that, say, this one's getting 7, this south facing is getting 20, this what is this, west yeah, this west facing is also getting 20 for now. It won't get 20 the whole time. And this north facing is getting 17. So there is placement, and just note that if you want the easy mode, just go north. But really, it's an average anyway, which we'll talk about in a different video. Relating to the wind turbines, they also are affected by placement. If I jump over here to this little setup I've got here, you've noticed that I've got these windmills starting at sea level and then moving up a foundation, a square foundations amount all the way over to there. And these are just in the same order as you see them off in the distance there. And you'll notice that based on the height of the wind turbine, you generate a different amount of power. And so clearly the correlation here is that the higher they are, the more they generate. It doesn't mean that that one over there currently, which is these are 150 on these far right three, that's what they're doing right now. They could calm down. The whole thing could go from 30 to 60. They do vary based on time of day, whatever, but the biggest variable for players is going to be the height of the turbine. But at some max height does not guarantee you the max output all the time. So just note that when doing turbines, and you've probably seen a lot of the clan bases and bigger bases, they've got their turbines way up high. It's because they know this and they're taking advantage of the installation height to generate the max power. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is charging batteries, otherwise the charging rule. And so I have this equation that I've talked about. I've called it the minimum charge equation. I think it might make more sense if I called it the equivalence charge equation. But essentially all it means is that if you take the active usage on a battery, remember I showed you that you can look at these stats. Right now the active usage is 0. But if you take the active usage, and the active usage just reflects the amount of things that are creating a load on your battery. So in this case, if I were to say, turn on these turrets here, you'll notice that my active usage is 30. And so what that means is that you need to know how much of that root power that you're going to need on average over a rust day to keep that battery from dying. And batteries do not have a one-to-one relationship with the things they're powering, in that they have an 80% charging efficiency, in that they will only accept 80% of the root power or incoming power for charging. So if you send it 10 rust watts, it's only going to allow 8 of those to charge against that active usage. And so, that might sound really complicated, but the easy way is just take your active usage, divide it by 0.8. So that times 1 divided by 0.8, or just active usage divided by 0.8 will give you the minimum or equivalence that you need to keep it from dying. So this really just gives you exactly what you need to neither charge or deplete the battery. So it's this and then plus a little bit, so that it's got a positive, weight to it. And so if you use this example, I got 30 active usage, 30 divided by 0.8 is 37.5, so call it 38. So I need a minimum of 38 rust watts coming into this battery to keep it from draining. So at 38, that's just barely enough. That will stay at a capacity of 24,000 rust watt minutes. If I were to say drop this down to 30 and match the active usage, here we have active usage of 30. If I send it exactly 30 to charge, that will eventually, it's gonna be very slow, but there you go, it's 23,999. It is gonna start dropping because it's not one-to-one. So I need to use this simple equation, active usage times 1 divided by 0.8. So if it's 30, it's 30 divided by 0.8, gives me 37.5. And so I'm going to give it 38. That will never let it drain and slowly trickle charge it. So you can start to manipulate your systems to where, maybe I send it 50 so that it has more of a weight toward charging and brings it up faster. And then once it is already at 24,000 rust watt minutes, and there it goes, it'll click over there here in 1 second. Once it clicks over to full capacity, you can then just set your thing to a minimum. In this case, 38 works, and it will never drop below capacity as long as it always gets 38 on average over, say, a 24-hour period. And so that applies to any of the batteries. That applies to, the difference between a small, medium, and large battery is only the capacity. So a small battery can have a max of 400 rust watt minutes. This one has a max of 9,000, and this one has a max of 24,000. And so that's the only difference. Their behavior is exactly the same. To keep this from dying, you would just take whatever its active usage is, max of 15, and divide it by 0.8, and that gives you the minimum. So add a couple of rust watts at least, or more if you want it to charge faster, and it will stay charged and never drain. So that's the basic rule of batteries, is that active usage is the number you need to look at in order to determine how much of that root power that we talked about must be arriving to keep this battery from dying. And just a quick little tip, you'll notice that when I turned off this switch, which we're going to talk about, the active usage went to 0. That's actually a new thing, that it's not registering these things because they're off, and this switch has cut them off also. So right now that 38 is having a lot more charging weight, doesn't need it because it's full, than when this is on. If I turn this on, my active usage is now 30. So if you're in a pinch and you have stuff and you don't have enough root power, you can always put a switch on there, shut them down, and your active usage will go to 0, and then that 38 goes all to charging and is not counteracted at all by any of the items that you have hooked up. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about somewhat briefly is the 2024 electrical update in general. And if you want to know, everything about this, I have a very detailed video on this. I'll link that here. Check that out. But as a core concept, it is important to understand the relationship between these switches, the main switches that you use, and batteries. And so number one, they no longer consume power. So it used to be that, say, to use an AND switch, it needed 1 rust watt to run. So if you say sent it 9, on the passing side, it would only send through 8 because it needed 1 to run. It's no longer the case. They removed their need for power consumption, which makes things much, much less complicated. And also, they updated the branch switch so that you can now, on PC anyway, this is all based on PC, you can set it to 1. And so now it used to be that it was, you had to have 2 there. So now it can be 1 and 99. So that's actually an example of what I'm just talking about. It's not consuming power because it's receiving 100. It's passing 1 out here and the rest out there. That is a total of 100. So it's no longer consuming power. And importantly, they're not registering as active usage. We talked about this with the charging batteries and using that equation, and it's all based off the active usage. They used to register on the battery, which means they used to be a drain on the battery. They are no longer registering active usage, and ergo are not a drain, which means you don't have to account for them when you're doing your root power and your charging and to this point. So those are like the core things. The second part is that the logic gates, especially like the more commonly used ones, the AND, the OR, the XOR or XOR switch, for those of you who like to make fun of me for that, they now operate more appropriately. They updated how they work as a logic gate. So for instance, if I run, say, power to this OR switch here, this is set to 1 and the rest is 99, which means, again, it's not using any power. You'll notice it's not registering anything on the battery. We have this stuff hooked up. Still no active usage. Battery will not drain without active usage. And the side that's passing is the 99 predictably. The OR switch passes. It requires 1 or 2, doesn't matter. If 2, it will pass the greater of the 2, which is 99. I can illustrate that by simply setting this to say 15, and it'll pass 85. There it is, because that's the greater of the 2. And now, and we'll talk about this in the next module over there, but they now have a greater functionality as a logic gate, in that it's only, right now we're on the 85. If this was, say, going to a separate battery and there was something connected off of this, they do not register active usage on the other side. So if this was its own battery and this was its own battery, it's not going to register on the smaller one, only the larger one, which we again will illustrate over there. But again, watch my primary video on this if you really want to understand this. But this is a huge part of the update and a huge core concept, because knowing this allows for easier circuit design and much easier root power charging relationships. Okay, so the fifth and final core concept I'm going to cover before we hit that bonus one down there is the power of power sharing. And I think partly because of how recent the 2024 electrical update was, and maybe the idea that it's a little too complex for most people, I don't see this a lot, and I think this is one of the most underutilized aspects of this game, which is why I included it as a core concept. And so what I mean is that this this is made possible, and it affects everything we've talked about as far as when you're building circuits. And so I have a simple thing. I'll show you an example here. I have a simple setup here. I've got a power out from this battery going to a switch. It's running to a memory cell. On the output side, I have an industrial light that requires 1 rust watt. This could be anything. I have on the inverted output side of this memory cell, I have a turret. This could be anything. I just chose them because of their power differences as far as requirements go. And so right now, with it all off, I have an active usage of 0. You can thank the 2024 electrical update for that. And if I turn it on, and it's on the industrial wall light side, which is the output side, that requires 1 rust watt. So I have 1 active usage. So again, based on what we talked about, I have nothing for this, it's free. Nothing for this, it's free. It's just the actual item at the end of the circuit that's being registered. 1 active usage. That's very little. That's almost the least amount of power you can ask from a battery, which means that my charging requirement is very small. I could set this to 5 rust watts, and I'm still way over what I need to keep that thing charging with only 1 active usage. So what you can do with power sharing is that because of that 2024 electrical update, now each bank, so if this bank coming in here and going out that way versus this bank coming in going out that way, they're treated separately. So if I swap them, and I simply have this running to the toggle here, if I swap them to the inverted output side, I've now swapped to the turret side, which requires 10 rust watts. And you'll notice that I now have an active usage of 10, not 11, because we're not counting this anymore. It's separate. Active usage of 10. That's a different power requirement. I can't run that off of 5. I'm going to need more power to keep that from, I see how it already started dropping there in the capacity, so it'll slowly come back up. And so what you can do is you can power share things based on either doubling up. You could literally set this up just like I have now and put 100 rust watts of turrets coming out of this side and say 100 rust watts of farming out of this side. You could switch your base between turret mode and farming mode, whatever, and have the same power, the same root power coming in, at 100 active usage of 100, you need at least 125 to be equivalent. So 126 or more, really 130 is a solid one to pick for that. And I could swap between them, and they're independent. They don't each register at the same time. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate here, is that right now we're on the turret, active usage 10. If I swap back over to the light, active usage 1. Those are 2 different charging requirements. So there's 2 ways to think about this. Number 1 is you can have 2 separate systems essentially coming off of each output here that are too much for 1 battery, but one at a time, this 1 battery can power them. So that, base defenses versus, say, farming. You can turn on base defenses when you're not home, or have this set up to it automatically trips if someone starts raiding to put it into base defense mode. This allows for different base states, defense, crafting, whatever. So this is something that, utilized correctly, can be used to decrease your charging. So like this battery here, let's say I only have 10 rust watts. I think a solar panel placed correctly over a 24-hour rust day puts out something like 10.5 on average, because it gets, if you're on a vanilla server and it gets dark for 15 minutes, that solar panel does nothing. And so you average over 24 rust hours around 10.5, 11 rust watts out of a solar panel. That's not enough to keep this charged. And so what you can do is, have this in a different mode where that amount is plenty for this 1 or more rust watts that I'm using just for lights. But if you need to switch over, you can. And even though that's not enough, it will at least slow this down, and it will start to lose capacity, but very, very slowly. And then once you swap back over, that 11 that I have set has a greater charging weight because it's only being affected by an active usage of 1 and not 10, if that makes sense. And so just as an example, here I have set up over here off of a small battery. And so this is kind of like for those of you who are in little 2x1s or whatever. You can do a lot with this. In this case, I've got this small battery. If I turn this thing on, my charging coming in is 19. So I'm kind of simulating. This is simulating like 2 solar panels on your base. This small battery currently, we're in the turret mode, right? So if you look at the small battery, my active usage is 10. I have a max output, max active usage of 15 on these. And that is enough to keep it going, and it's running this turret. But you couldn't run this turret and all this stuff. So what I've done is, on this one side here, the turret's the red. Here we can trace that out. That turret is connected right there, and that's running out of the inverted output. I've got a switch that's before all of it, and I'll show you why I did that. The other output of the memory cell is running into this branch, of which I've got the power out running to a splitter to power each one of these 3 stoves here, electric stoves. And then this other, the branch out, which is set to 6, is running through a switch to these lights. And so if I swap this over, there we go. Now we're in crafting mode, base mode. So that's off. We can't power all this at the same time, but we can with one tiny car battery. We can have 2 different sets of stuff. So I've got lights and furnaces here. You'll notice the active usage is 15. If I get a little low on my root power and I want to save some juice, I could simply turn off my light with this switch, which is great. It also cuts off the active usage. Now I'm at 9 of those lights. That's based on that 2024 electrical update. And so now I have this greater functionality where I can reduce the active usage to just minus the lights, or turn the lights on and go full if I'm getting the full. Maybe I'm getting the full 19, 20 during the day. I've got 40 coming in during the day. I can turn it all on, and at night I could turn these off to kind of save some juice. Or I could turn the whole thing off, everything, and have absolutely no active usage, and I'm all charging. And then if someone's breaking in, and it could be automatic set by a switch or whatever, or you just do it manually, I can swap over to turret mode. Maybe I'm logging out and I want this turret inside my base running when I'm not there, and then when I log back in, I switch back over to this and I'm crafting again. So, power sharing has 2 main functionalities. One is it allows you to set up simple systems in your base where you share double the stuff off one battery. It also has the ability to let you manipulate how much of your root power, based on that 80% charging efficiency rule we talked about, how much of that root power is directed toward the battery, not taken up by items. So this is probably one of the most powerful core concepts that you can utilize, because you can really do a lot with less and have greater control over your battery's ability to recharge. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is advanced power management. This is a bonus module for this video. I don't consider this a core concept, because you can do all of this and play this game and never do this, and it will be just fine. But once you start mastering these concepts and you start getting into advanced power management, this is a great thing to understand. This is the knee core. Again, I have a very detailed video on this, so I will briefly cover this, but if you want to know all the little bits, ins and outs of this, then I'll link that video to check out. But essentially what the knee core does is it's a circuit that allows you to have a better relationship between root power and charging. And so what it does is, I have this branch set up here so that I can simulate variances in root power. I talked about how wind turbines can have 150 down to 30. Solar panels obviously fluctuate by the sun, which means your root power is just going up and down, up and down. And what this does is that it allows for a failover point where if you're making 102, in this case, because it's a large battery setup, 102 rust watts or more of root power, you will run everything hooked to it off of root power and not the battery. So the battery is at active usage 0, even though I have this light running, which should register as 1. And so whatever you have over 102 is -2 goes to charging. And so what this allows you to do is passively charge your battery while running your stuff off of the root power instead of the battery. If that root power drops, which it will, so let's say you don't have extra wind turbines or extra solar panels, you have just enough, then when it drops, if it hits 101 at 102, it's still on root power, no active usage. If it hits 101 or lower, it swaps over to the battery. Right, there you go, active usage 1. So now we are on the battery, and whatever's left over comes into charging. So if your root power drops down to 50, you swap over to battery, and anything that's available gets sent back to your battery. And so you have active usage of 1. Once you go over 101, so let's say I jump to 115 in the morning, now I've swapped over active usage 0. I'm no longer powering this off of this. I'm powering it off of the root power. So again, I go into much greater detail and show what every switch is doing and what to do in my video. So check that out if you want to know. But essentially, what you can work toward is using advanced power management, where you can run your stuff off of your root power until you no longer can, and then it runs off the battery, and then it automatically switches back once you have enough root power again. And what this does is it kind of circumvents the charging efficiency of the batteries of 80%, because now you're not having to provide as much root power. You can do everything you do that I showed you over there with a little bit less power if you use this circuit as an example. And note that all of these are part of that update, which means this circuit is free. None of these require power. None of these are using active usage. The only thing that this battery and the root power, when you're on that side, are dealing with is this one light, and this light represents your base. So you would, whatever you could have 100 rust watts of stuff hooked up here, and it would flop over between battery and root power depending on the current amount of root power. So that, folks, is just about all I've got. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. Otherwise, you can get me on my Discord. See you later.